These are the KD type couplers that I use for body mounts. The 906 is the wider box, and the 907 is the narrower box where the coupler comes out of the housing. And in some cases the 907 has to be used because of space limitations, and so that has to be done. And in the case of the 906, sometimes you have to do some modifications, like put notches in the side of the box in order for wheel clearance to clear on cars that are fairly long, say the 50-foot type cars, in order for them to go unimpeded around 10-foot diameter or 8-foot diameter curve track. The 907, normally meant for truck mount application, is also usable for body mount, and I do it quite often. This video is about body mounting KD couplers on the USA Trains modern tank cars. There are 3 different size tank cars, and there's a 50-foot one, and there's a 42-foot foot one, and there's a 29-foot one. And in the case of using KD 906 type couplers, which is this one over here, there can be a problem when you try to operate the tank car on a 10-foot diameter and especially 8-foot diameter track, where the wheels will scrape against the side of the coupler box. And that can be dealt with by taking the box and beveling the sides with notches. They'd be at somewhat of an angle, as can be seen here, so that the wheels will be able to, get a little bit better perch as they rub against the box. But it's not perfect, and particularly if you mount it with the screws on the sides like they intend to do. So what you can do then is to help improve that situation is use the center screws only. Normally use the back one anyway, but use this screw, use the center screw point, and trim off the ears on the side of the box. And that way the back sides of the wheels will not rub on the screw heads, so you can buy a little bit more clearance. Another issue is the spacer that USA Trains provides, and it's a bit too thick. And the spacer really should be about 30 thousandths of an inch thinner, and so that the coupler will line up with the KD 980 gauge and won't be too low, and if the little hose or trip pin hits things on the track layout, that can be a problem. And so what you can do is you can either trim the material off the surface, about 30 thousandths off the surface of these things, this on perhaps either side, but preferably on the back side, because there's material that might be too thin. And if you do that, the screw heads that hold this thing onto the chassis of the metal chassis of the tank car will tend to interfere with the lid of the box. This is a normal lid here. So what I've done was 2 things. One, I've modified or added in these spacers, by the way, come with either white or black depending on the color of the car. So you can cut a little piece of plastic and glue it in to the underside here, and you can then drill another hole in this area here. These are turned around, and that's so you could turn the thing around and use the inline holes to mount the coupler box on. And so that in conjunction with replacing the lid, which normally has this lip on it, with a thinner one. You can buy ABS plastic that's textured even from Tap Plastics, and cut it with a scissor. So if you get it, maybe about 40 thousandths thick, as opposed to this one, which is roughly 70 thousandths thick, that means that the two together will be thinner. And so when you mount the box on the spacer, which is mounted on the car, then the coupler height is raised up that amount, so it should work satisfactorily. But that method will allow you to maybe operate the car on 10-foot diameter track, but certainly not 8 foot. It'll still rub on 8 foot. And even on 10 foot, sometimes the wheels, the backside of the wheels have some rubbing action. And so what I've done then to further improve on that was to not use the 906, but use the 907 and body mount that. And make my own spacer, which is thinner, which is 30 thousandths inch thinner than the factory spacer. And what I've done was to, because you have to get the holes precise, because the holes would, these outside holes would have to line up with those holes so it fits onto the metal bosses when you mount the spacer. They have to be precisely done. The holes have to be precisely drilled and precisely positioned. And then 2 small holes have to be drilled and tapped for, say, a number 2 type screw to mount the KD 907 box, which has a smaller footprint, as you can see here. So a 907 has smaller width than the 906. So that means that there's more clearance for the wheels when the truck has to turn, when it goes around tight radius or tight diameter tracks. There's more room afforded. And it's because the holes have to be done precisely, you can either make an aluminum or plastic spacer. What I decided to do was make an aluminum spacer with the precise holes, and then put them in stack a plastic one underneath it, and use this as a drill template. And because it's metal, the drill won't tend to dig into it like it would plastic, and yet you could precisely locate the holes in the plastic spacer, and this one's not drilled yet, and then use the plastic spacer and install it on the car. But you need 6 millimeter long screws. I think it's M2 by 6 millimeter screws. The factory screws will kind of work, but they're a little too short. The factory screws that come with the regular boxes, the 4 screws that mount it on the car. So you can get M2 by 6 millimeter screws from Grainger. I did it. They're not very expensive. So that gives you some ideas of how you can body mount KD couplers. And of course I ended up using this one on the 50-foot cars, and this can work okay, this method I described previously, on the 42 and the 29-foot cars. The 29-foot cars, you don't have to notch the sides of the box because it's such a short wheelbase, but you do on the 50-foot cars if you choose to use this method. But again, these won't work on 50-foot cars on 8-foot diameter track. The wheels will bind up against the box. So this is the best method to use, but it takes a little more effort to get holes precisely drilled. But again, if you use a metal template and get the holes precise, you don't have to precisely measure and drill the holes on the plastic. You merely take the template, put it on top, put it in a vise, and drill the holes accordingly. So that gives you an idea what you can do with the USA Trains modern tank cars. This is the USA Trains 50-foot modern tank car. USA Trains made 3 different lengths in these cars. This is the long one, the 50-foot. And the shorter one, or the medium-sized one, is 42 foot, and the small one here is 29 foot. And they're all similar except for their length. And in the case of this 50-foot one, with the original for mounting KD 906 type coupler boxes, which have the wide width, the opening, I had to do some some tricks with this, and I discovered using those type boxes that the wheels would scrape against the side of the box and wear rings on them as they go around 10-foot diameter, and you can just forget about 8-foot diameter curves. They just bind up. So what I decided to do, I decided to switch and use the smaller KD 907 box, which has a little bit narrower opening at the mouth where the coupler comes out. And I made my own spacer because the factory spacer is about 30 thousandths too thick, and that serves to basically place the coupler too low toward the railhead. And when you use the 980 gauge, of course, it doesn't line up, it's lower than the gauge. And so I made my own custom spacer, didn't use the factory one for these big long cars here, and made my own spacer that's about 30 thousandths of an inch thinner, and that brought the correct relationship with the coupler to line up. And so that took care of the issue with the long 50-foot modern tank car. This is the USA Trains 42-foot tank car, and in order to get the proper coupler height from the railhead, the way these USA Trains cars, these modern tank cars, come to the factory, they're really about 30 thousandths too high from the railhead. When you use body mount KD couplers along with their factory spacer they have in there. And so what I did was I rotated the spacer and mounted the coupler box with inline holes and kind of put little notches so that the wheels will not rub against it when going around 10-foot or 8-foot curves. And in order to keep the car height proper for the coupler to line up with the KD 980 gauge, I actually replaced the lid that's meant for the KD 906 type coupler assembly, and made a custom thinner gauge or thinner thickness of the lid out of ABS plastic, and put that on as the lid, and then mounted the box using the inline holes rather than the outboard holes, because the wheel would rub against the outboard holes with if you use the outboard screws to hold the box to the adapter. So that's how I dealt with the 42-foot car.